I signed the divorce papers while my husband flew to Paris with his boss, leaving me and our daughter in a rundown apartment. I thought this was my lowest moment, until his reclusive billionaire father appeared at my door. He looked into my eyes and told me I was his missing child. In that instant, my cheating husband became my half-brother, and I realized I finally had the weapons to burn their billion-dollar empire to the ground. My name is Sydney Weber. I am 32 years old, and until the ground fell out from under me, my world was defined by the beep of a barcode scanner and the ache in my lower back after an 8-hour shift. I lived in Aurora, Colorado, a place that sits on the edge of the Rockies, but often feels like it is just waiting for something better to happen. That was how I felt about my life too. I was waiting. I was holding my breath. I worked the checkout lane at a mid-range supermarket, the kind of place where people bought organic kale if they had a good week and frozen pizzas if they did not. I knew the regulars by the contents of their carts, but they rarely looked me in the eye. To them, I was just a pair of hands scanning their milk and bread. It was honest work, but it was hard work. It was the kind of work that left a film of exhaustion over your skin that a hot shower could never quite wash away. I had been married to Lucas Carter for 7 years. 7 years is a long time. It is long enough to convince yourself that the silence at the dinner table is just comfort, not emptiness. Lucas worked in finance at Hawthorne Dynamics. The name of the company sounded like steel and money. It sounded important. When we first met, I thought he was the most ambitious man I had ever seen. He wore suits that he could not afford and spoke about the market like it was a living beast he was destined to tame. We lived in a small rental apartment on the second floor of a complex that had seen better days in the 90s. The carpet was a shade of beige that looked permanently dirty, and the heating system rattled like a dying engine every time the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. But it was home because of Mia. My daughter was 4 years old. A whirlwind of chaotic energy with messy hair and a laugh that could crack open the grayest sky. She liked to draw on the walls when I was not looking. Behind the television stand, there was a masterpiece of purple and green scribbles that she insisted was a portrait of our cat, even though we did not own a cat. I was the one who scrubbed the scribbles. I was the one who made sure the rent check cleared. I was the one who stretched a pound of ground beef into 3 meals. Lucas was different. He existed in a different mental tax bracket. He would come home late, loosening his tie with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire global economy. He would look around our cramped living room, at the pile of laundry on the sofa, and the toys scattered across the rug, and he would sneer. It was a subtle thing, a twitch of the nose, but I saw it. He called it a mediocre life. He told me that we were meant for more, by which he meant he was meant for more. He often complained that my vision was too small. He said I was content with surviving while he was trying to conquer. I took the extra shifts at the supermarket so he could buy the right shoes to impress the partners. I wore jeans from the thrift store so he could have the dry cleaning done for his shirts. I told myself this was a partnership. I was the foundation, and he was the skyscraper. You do not see the foundation, but the building cannot stand without it. That was the lie I told myself to sleep at night. Then there was Celeste. Lucas had always talked about his work, but lately, the conversations had shifted. They were no longer about the market or the clients. They were about Celeste Moreau. She was his boss, a woman who had shattered the glass ceiling at Hawthorne Dynamics and built a throne on the shards. The way Lucas said her name made my stomach turn, though I could not explain why at the time. He spoke of her with a reverence he had never shown me. Celeste is brilliant, he would say while staring at his phone during dinner. She closed a deal today that is worth $50 million. She speaks fluent French. She knows wine. She knows art. I found myself looking her up on my break at the supermarket. I sat in the break room, smelling of sanitizer and old coffee, scrolling through her social media. She was beautiful in a sharp, intimidating way. She wore white suits that looked like they had never touched a speck of dust. She stood in boardrooms and on Parisian balconies. I felt a pang of admiration mixed with a heavy, dull ache of inadequacy. I thought she was amazing. I thought she was everything I was not. I did not realize then that I was admiring the shark that was circling my lifeboat. The cracks in our marriage did not appear all at once. They started as hairline fractures. Lucas began to critique me more openly. It was not just about the apartment or the lack of money anymore. It was about me. He told me I was too country for his colleagues. He said I would not understand the nuances of a corporate dinner. One evening, as I was folding his socks, he looked at me and said that I did not fit into the finance world. He said I was too soft, too simple. He asked me why I did not have more ambition, why I was happy scanning groceries. He did not seem to remember that my scanning groceries was the only reason we had electricity. I swallowed the insults. I tucked them away in the same place I kept my anxiety about the bills. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself the pressure at Hawthorne Dynamics was crushing him, and he was just venting. I was his wife. I was supposed to be his safe harbor. But the harbor was getting lonely. The phone calls started a month ago. It was always late, usually after 9 in the evening. His phone would buzz on the coffee table, lighting up the dim room. Lucas would lunge for it, his movements sharp and panicked. He would glance at me, his eyes guarded, and then flip the phone over or slide it into his pocket. "Who is it?" I would ask. "Just work," he would say. "The London markets are opening. You would not understand." He would walk into the bedroom or step out into the hallway, closing the door firmly behind him. I would sit on the sofa, listening to the murmur of his voice through the thin walls. His tone was not the stressed, professional tone he used with clients. It was lower. It was softer. When I walked into a room, he would angle his screen away from me. If I came up behind him while he was typing, he would hit the lock button so fast his thumb would blur. He password-protected everything. He started taking his phone into the bathroom when he showered. I felt the dread building in my chest, a heavy stone that made it hard to breathe, but I was afraid to ask. I was afraid to shatter the illusion. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was planning a surprise. Maybe he was working on a confidential merger. I made excuses for him because the alternative was too terrifying to face. The breaking point, the moment the hairline fractures turned into a canyon, was Mia's 4th birthday. I had been planning it for weeks. We did not have money for a party, but I wanted it to be special. I had saved $20 from my tips to buy her a present, a set of art supplies so she could stop drawing on the walls. I asked Lucas 2 weeks in advance to be home by 6. I reminded him 3 times. He promised. He said he would be there. The day came. I finished my shift early and rushed to the bakery section. I found a cake that had been marked down because the icing was slightly smashed on one side. It was vanilla with pink roses. It was 50% off. I bought it and felt a surge of victory. I picked Mia up from daycare. She was vibrating with excitement. "Daddy is coming home early," I told her. We set the table. We put on party hats. I lit the 4 candles. 6 o'clock came and went. At 6:30, I called him, straight to voicemail. At 7, Mia asked where Daddy was. I told her he was stuck in traffic. At 7:45, the candles had burned down to little stubs, the wax dripping onto the pink icing. At 8, I realized he was not coming. We ate the cake alone. I sang happy birthday to my daughter in our quiet, dim kitchen. Her voice was small when she thanked me, and I saw the disappointment in her eyes. It broke something inside me that I did not think could be fixed. He came home at 10. He smelled of expensive steak and red wine. He did not even look at the cake on the counter. He mumbled an apology about a crisis at the office, about Celeste needing him to review a portfolio urgently. He did not kiss Mia goodnight. He went straight to the shower and then to bed, turning his back to me. That night, I could not sleep. The apartment felt suffocating. I needed air. I stepped out onto the small concrete balcony. It was late October, and the Colorado air was biting. The wind cut through my thin sweater, chilling my skin. But I welcomed the pain. It felt real. Below me, the parking lot was dark and silent. A stray dog was digging through the dumpster near the complex entrance. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold my pieces together. I looked at the dark windows of the other apartments and wondered if anyone else was standing in the cold, feeling their life unravel. I knew something was wrong. I knew it in the pit of my stomach. in the marrow of my bones. Lucas was drifting away, pulled by a tide I could not see. I thought about the way he said Celeste's name. I thought about the locked phone. I thought about my daughter's sad eyes over the discount cake. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of exhaust and pine. I tried to push the fear down, to swallow the bile rising in my throat. It is just a rough patch, I whispered to the empty air. We will get through this. But as I stood there in the dark, shivering not just from the cold, but from a premonition I could not name, I realized I was lying to myself. The storm was not coming. The storm was already here, and I was standing directly in its path without an umbrella. The illusion of my marriage did not shatter all at once like a dropped glass. It eroded, grain by grain, until the structure was so thin that a single breath could blow it down. That breath came on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 days after the birthday disaster. I was running an errand near the financial district. It was not a place I usually frequented. The buildings there were tall and comprised of blue glass that reflected the clouds, making the corporate world look like it owned the sky. I had picked up a prescription for Mia at a pharmacy a few blocks away and decided to cut through the plaza across from Hawthorne Dynamics to catch the bus. That was when I saw the vehicle. It was a black SUV, sleek and massive, the kind of car that costs more than what I would earn in 5 years of scanning groceries. It was idling at the curb, its hazard lights blinking rhythmically. The passenger door opened, and my husband stepped out. Lucas looked different than he did at home. He was wearing his best navy suit, the one he usually saved for annual reviews, and his posture was straighter. He looked important. He looked like he belonged to this world of glass and steel. But it was not his suit that stopped me in my tracks. It was the woman stepping out of the driver's seat. Celeste Moreau. I recognized her instantly from the photos I had obsessed over. She was taller in person, her blonde hair cut in a sharp bob that moved like liquid silk when she turned her head. She was wearing a trench coat that probably cost thousands of dollars, belted tightly at the waist. I stepped behind a concrete planter, my heart hammering against my ribs. I told myself I was being ridiculous. They were colleagues. They were probably going to a client meeting. This was normal. This was business. Then, she laughed. She threw her head back, and Lucas leaned in close, whispering something that made her smile widen. He reached out and placed his hand on the small of her back. It was a possessive, intimate gesture, the kind of touch that says, I know you. He guided her toward the revolving doors, and for a split second, their shoulders brushed and lingered. They looked like a power couple from a magazine spread. They looked perfect. I stood there clutching a paper bag of amoxicillin, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. I convinced myself I was wrong. I told myself that in the corporate world, boundaries were different. Maybe touching a boss on the back was just how people networked. I drove the doubt down into the pit of my stomach and buried it under a layer of desperate hope. But the evidence began to mount, and it was not subtle. Over the next 3 days, Lucas came home later and later. When he did walk through the door, he brought a scent with him that made my throat close up. It was not the smell of the office or the stale air of the commuter train. It was a complex, floral fragrance, jasmine and sandalwood, that smelled expensive. It clung to his blazer. It was on his collar. One evening, I was doing laundry. I picked up his white dress shirt and brought it to my face. The scent was there, faint but undeniable. It was the smell of another woman. I threw the shirt into the washing machine and poured in twice the amount of detergent, watching the water churn, wishing I could wash away the sickness rising in my throat. The final blow to my denial came on Friday evening. Lucas was in the shower. He had left his phone on the bedside table, face up. He usually guarded it like a state secret, but he must have forgotten in his haste to wash off the day, or wash off her. The screen lit up. I did not want to look. I wanted to turn away and keep living in the dark, but my body moved on its own. I walked over to the nightstand and looked down. One new message. CM. The preview text was visible for only a moment before the screen went dark again, but I saw enough to stop my heart. Suite booked at Le Maurice. Can't wait to show you the view. It was followed by a single red heart emoji. Paris, Le Maurice, a heart. I backed away from the phone as if it were a bomb. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling so hard I had to clasp them together. Le Maurice was one of the most expensive hotels in Paris. I knew this because Lucas had once shown me a travel documentary about it, mocking the price per night. Now, he was going there, with her. When Lucas came out of the bathroom, drying his hair with a towel, I was sitting on the bed, staring at the wall. He did not notice my pale face or the way I was shaking. He was too busy rehearsing his lie. "I have to go to Paris tomorrow," he said, tossing the towel into the hamper. "Big merger. Celeste needs me on the ground. It is a huge opportunity. Sydney." He said it so easily. The lie rolled off his tongue with the smoothness of practiced lines. He did not stutter. He did not look away. He looked me right in the eye and lied to me, and I let him. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone at him. I felt frozen, trapped in a nightmare where I could not speak. I nodded. I asked him how long he would be gone. "Just a week," he said, pulling a suitcase from the closet. "I will be back before you know it." I watched him pack. I watched him fold the shirts I had ironed. I watched him pack his best cologne. I was helping him prepare to leave me, and he had no idea that I knew. The drive to the airport the next morning was suffocating. The silence in the car was heavy, filled with everything I was not saying. It was a gray Saturday, the sky threatening snow. Mia was in the back seat, kicking her legs and humming a song from a cartoon. When we pulled up to the departures terminal at Denver International Airport, Lucas did not even turn off the engine. He checked his watch. He was anxious. He was in a hurry. "Be good for your mom," he said to Mia, twisting in his seat to look at her. He did not reach back to squeeze her hand. He did not unbuckle to give her a proper hug. He just gave her a distracted nod. Mia reached out for him, her little hand grasping at the air, but he was already opening his door. "Love you," he muttered to me, but his eyes were scanning the curb. I followed his gaze. 50 feet away, standing by a pillar, was a woman in a long beige coat and oversized sunglasses. She was checking her phone. It was Celeste. She was waiting for him. "I love you too," I whispered, but he was already out of the car. He grabbed his bag from the trunk and walked away without looking back. He walked straight toward her. I watched as they did not greet each other. That would be too obvious. But they fell into step together, walking through the automatic doors, side by side. I drove home in a daze. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Mia fell asleep in the back, oblivious to the fact that her father had just walked out of our lives. The apartment felt empty when we returned. It was cold. I turned up the thermostat, but the chill was coming from inside me. I made lunch for Mia. I cleaned the kitchen. I went through the motions of being a person, but inside, I was screaming. At 3 p.m, my phone pinged. I was sitting on the couch, folding the laundry I had washed the day before. I picked up the phone, expecting a text from my mom or a notification from the electric company. It was an email. The subject line was stark and terrifying. Carter V. Weber. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I stared at the words, unable to comprehend them. I opened the email. It was a notification from a digital signing service. Lucas had sent me divorce papers. I checked the timestamp. He had sent them 20 minutes ago. I pictured him sitting in the first-class lounge, sipping complimentary champagne with Celeste, tapping on his tablet to end our 7-year marriage. He had not even waited to leave the country. He wanted to wipe the slate clean before the wheels left the tarmac. I scrolled down, my vision blurring with tears, and then another email popped into the inbox. This one was from an airline. Lucas and I shared a family email account for bills and travel, one he rarely used anymore and had clearly forgotten to log out of on his tablet. The email was a confirmation receipt. Reservation confirmed. Flight 404, Denver to Paris, Charles de Gaulle. Passengers, Lucas Carter, Celeste Moreau. Total cost, $12,450. The number stared back at me. $12,000. That was more than I made in 6 months. He had spent our entire savings, every penny we had scraped together for a down payment on a house, on 2 tickets to Paris with his boss. The air left my lungs. The room spun. I dropped the phone onto the carpet. He did not just leave me. He emptied us. He took the money for Mia's future. He took my dignity, and he took the last 7 years of my life, and he set them on fire. I looked at Mia, who was coloring in her book on the floor. She looked up at me and smiled, innocent and unaware. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but a sob ripped through my chest. I slid off the couch and curled into a ball on the rug, clutching my knees. The pain was physical. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and torn out my heart. I was 32 years old. I was a single mother. I was broke, and I was alone. I cried until my throat was raw. I cried until the sun went down and the apartment turned dark. I thought I had hit rock bottom. I thought this was the end of the story. But as the shadows lengthened across the floor and the digital clock on the stove blinked toward midnight, I had no idea that the doorbell was about to ring. I had no idea that while one life had just ended, another was waiting on the other side of that door, carrying a secret that would make my husband's betrayal look like child's play. The real storm was just beginning. The days that followed Lucas's departure were a blur of gray skies and numb silence, leading inevitably to the most painful night of the year. It was Christmas Eve. The world outside was wrapped in a blanket of aggressive, cheerful white snow, but inside apartment 2B, the air was stagnant and cold. I had not bothered to buy a tree. We could not afford one. And honestly, I did not have the energy to sweep up the needles. Instead, I had taped a string of discount lights to the window frame. Half of the bulbs were burnt out, leaving us in a flickering, dim gloom that felt appropriate for a funeral, not a holiday. Mia had finally fallen asleep. She was curled up on my chest on the sagging sofa, her small hand gripping the fabric of my sweater. Her breathing was the only sound in the room, a soft, rhythmic reminder that I had to keep breathing too, no matter how much I wanted to stop. I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows from the streetlights outside stretch and contort like ghosts. I was alone. I was divorced, or at least in the process of becoming so. I was broke, and the silence of the apartment was so loud, it was deafening. Then, there was a knock at the door. It was not a tentative knock. It was not the pounding of a landlord demanding late rent. It was 3 distinct, heavy raps, solid, authoritative, precise. I froze. It was nearly midnight. No one came to this part of Aurora at midnight unless it was trouble. My mind raced. Had Lucas come back? Had he forgotten his passport? A tiny, treacherous spark of hope flared in my chest, followed immediately by a wave of nausea. I gently shifted Mia off my chest, tucking a blanket around her as I laid her on the cushions. I stood up, smoothing my wrinkled shirt, and walked to the door on trembling legs. I looked through the peephole, but the hallway light had been broken for weeks, leaving the corridor in shadow. I could only see a silhouette, a tall, broad shape of a man. I unlocked the deadbolt with a loud click and opened the door just a few inches, keeping the chain fastened. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice cracking from hours of disuse. The man stepped forward into the sliver of light from my apartment. The air left my lungs in a sharp rush. I knew this face. I had seen it on the covers of the business magazines Lucas used to leave on the coffee table. I had seen it on the news when the stock market crashed or soared. I had seen it in the framed portrait in the lobby of the Hawthorne Dynamics building the one time I had brought Lucas his forgotten lunch. It was Elias Hawthorne. He was older in person than he appeared on television. The lines around his eyes were etched deep, like canyons in granite. He wore a long charcoal wool coat that looked softer than anything I had ever touched, and a scarf that was likely worth more than my car. Snowflakes melted on his silver hair. He was looking at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, his pale blue eyes searching my face as if he were trying to read a map written in a language only he understood. "Mrs. Carter," he said. His voice was gravel and velvet, low and commanding, Or should I say, Ms. Weber? Mr. Hawthorne, I stammered. I felt a sudden rush of panic. Lucas. This had to be about Lucas. Had he stolen money? Had he done something illegal before fleeing to Paris? Why else would the billionaire chairman of the company be standing at the door of a low-income apartment complex on Christmas Eve? If this is about Lucas, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, he is not here. He is in Paris, with Ms. Moreau. I know where he is, Elias said. He did not blink. I am not here for Lucas. I am here for you. May I come in? It was not a request. It was a statement of intent wrapped in politeness. I hesitated. My instincts screamed that this was dangerous. Men like Elias Hawthorne did not visit women like me for tea, but the authority in his gaze was paralyzed me. I closed the door, slid the chain off, and opened it fully. He stepped inside, bringing the smell of winter and expensive cologne into my stale living room. He looked around, his eyes taking in the peeling paint, the scribbles on the wall, the sleeping child on the sofa. He did not sneer like Lucas did. He looked pained. A shadow crossed his face, a flicker of raw grief that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He turned to me. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Sydney, what I am about to tell you will sound impossible. It will sound like madness, but you must listen. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. You are scaring me. What do you want? Elias reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. His hands, I noticed, were shaking slightly. It was a humanizing detail that terrified me more than his stoicism. 32 years ago, he began, his voice dropping to a whisper. My daughter was taken from her crib. She was 2 years old. Her name was Hazel. I stared at him, confused. I remembered the story vaguely. Every person in Colorado knew the story of the Hawthorne kidnapping. It was a cold case that came up on the news every anniversary. But what did that have to do with me? I am sorry. I said, that is terrible. But I do not understand why you are telling me this. Elias took a step closer. The air between us crackled with tension. Because, Sydney, he said, and the words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. You are not Sydney Weber. You are Hazel Hawthorne. You are my daughter. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the wind rattling the window pane. I could hear my own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stared at him. Then, a short, hysterical laugh bubbled up from my throat. That is insane, I said. I shook my head. Backing away from him. You have the wrong person. I am Sydney Weber. My parents are Gary and Linda Weber. I grew up in Maple Ridge. I have baby pictures. I have a birth certificate. You are mistaken. Please leave. Elias did not move. He opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. He held it out to me. Look at her, he commanded. I looked. It was a black and white photo of a toddler sitting on a velvet chair. She was wearing a lace dress. She was smiling, clutching a stuffed bear. But it was the eyes that stopped my breath. They were large, slightly wide-set, and shaped exactly like mine. And on her left wrist, there was a small, delicate gold bracelet with 2 initials engraved on the plate. A.E. Hazel Elias. I stared at the photo. It felt like looking into a mirror that distorted time. I have a birthmark, Elias said softly. On my right shoulder blade, it looks like a small star. My hand flew to my own shoulder, under my sweater, on my right shoulder blade. There was a birthmark shaped exactly like a star. I had always hated it. I covered it with makeup when I wore tank tops. That proves nothing, I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. Lots of people have birthmarks. Elias pulled another document from the envelope. This one was older. A police report. Yellowed with age. We spent decades looking, he said. We chased leads across the globe. We thought it was a ransom job gone wrong. We thought she was dead. But 6 months ago, a private investigator found a discrepancy in the adoption records of a rural county clerk office. A fake birth certificate issued 3 days after Hazel disappeared. It led us to a couple named Gary and Linda Weber. My knees felt weak. No, my parents were simple people. They were not kidnappers. They were not criminals. They were just distant, cold, but not criminals. I did not want to believe it. Elias continued. I needed to be sure. I could not storm into your life without proof. So, I came to see you. You came to see me? I asked. When? 3 weeks ago, he said, at the supermarket. I stood in your line. The memory flashed in my mind like a lightning strike. A Tuesday morning, a slow shift, an older man in a baseball cap and a nondescript jacket. He had bought a single bottle of mineral water. I remembered him because his hands looked too manicured for the jacket he was wearing. I remembered him because he had stared at me with such intensity that I had asked him if he needed a bag twice. You dropped a pen, Elias said. You picked it up and handed it to me. And after you scanned the water, you sneezed. You used a tissue and threw it in the trash bin behind the counter. I stared at him in horror. You? You went through my trash? I retrieved the tissue, he said, his voice unashamed. I sent it to a private lab in Switzerland. I had them run a full genetic profile against my own DNA and my wife's. He pulled the final piece of paper from the envelope. It was a sleek, modern document with a graph and a series of numbers. He held it up, his finger pointing to the bottom line. The probability of paternity is 99.999%, he read aloud. I looked at the number. It was just ink on paper, but it had the weight of a guillotine blade. 99.9%. I sank onto the arm of the sofa, my legs no longer able to support me. My entire life, 32 years of memories, of struggling for my parents' approval, of feeling like an outsider in my own home, suddenly shifted. It was as if someone had turned on the lights in a dark room and revealed that the furniture was all in the wrong place. Gary and Linda, I whispered. They knew? They knew, Elias said, his voice hardening into steel. They have been paid a monthly stipend from a shell company for 30 years to keep you hidden. They sold you, Sydney, and they sold my heart along with you. The room spun. I looked at Mia sleeping peacefully. She was the granddaughter of a billionaire. I was the daughter of a billionaire. And the man who had just left me, the man who had mocked my poverty and called me mediocre, was an employee of my father. This is not real, I said, grabbing my hair. This is a dream. I am going to wake up and Lucas will be home and none of this will be happening. Elias stepped forward and did something I did not expect. He knelt. The billionaire chairman of Hawthorne Dynamics knelt on my dirty beige carpet, right in front of my knees. He reached out and took my cold, rough hands in his warm, soft ones. It is real. Hazel, he said, using the name I did not know. I have missed you every single day for 30 years. I am not going to lose you again. I know your husband has left you. I know you are hurting, but you have power now. Sydney, you have a family. You have me. I looked into his eyes, my eyes, and saw the truth burning there. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. But for the first time in my life, looking at this stranger, I felt a connection I had never felt with Gary or Linda. I felt seen. I am not Hazel, I whispered, tears finally spilling over. I am Sydney. We will figure out who you are together, he said. But first, you need to pack a bag. You and your daughter are not staying in this apartment 1 minute longer. I looked around the small, cold room. I looked at the discount lights flickering in the window. I thought of Lucas in Paris, drinking champagne, thinking he had discarded me like trash. And then I looked at the man kneeling before me, offering me a hand that held the power to crush the world Lucas worshipped. I did not know if I could trust him. I did not know if this was a rescue or another trap. But as I squeezed Elias Hawthorne's hand back, I knew one thing for certain. Sydney Weber, the invisible checkout girl, died tonight. And whoever was waking up in her place was going to be someone Lucas Carter would regret meeting for the rest of his miserable life. The drive to Maple Ridge took 40 minutes, but it felt like 40 years. I sat in the passenger seat of Elias Hawthorne's town car. My hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my fingernails left crescent moon indentations in my palms. Mia was asleep in the back, strapped into a car seat that Elias's driver had produced from the trunk as if they had been expecting a toddler all along. The luxury of the leather seats, the silence of the engine, and the scent of expensive cedar wood inside the vehicle were in violent contrast to the turmoil churning in my gut. We pulled up to the house I had grown up in. It was a single-story ranch with peeling yellow siding and a lawn that was more crabgrass than green. A plastic snowman with a dent in its side stood by the mailbox, a relic from a Christmas 10 years ago. I used to think this house was just modest. Now, staring at it through the tinted window of a billionaire's car, it looked like a cage. "I am coming in with you," Elias said. He did not ask. He simply opened his door and stepped out into the biting cold. I followed him up the cracked concrete walkway. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and denial. Part of me still wanted Gary and Linda to open the door and laugh. To tell me this man was crazy. To pull out a photo album of my birth that I had simply forgotten existed. I unlocked the front door with my key. The familiar smell of stale cigarette smoke, fried grease, and cheap lemon air freshener hit me instantly. It was the smell of my childhood. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. Gary was in his recliner, a beer balanced on his stomach, the blue light of the television flickering across his face. Linda was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. They looked up as I entered, their expressions shifting from boredom to confusion, and then, as they saw the tall, imposing figure of Elias Hawthorne step in behind me, to unparalleled terror. Gary scrambled out of his chair, knocking his beer onto the carpet. Linda dropped her dish rag. They knew. The moment I saw their eyes widen, the last shred of my hope evaporated. They did not look like confused parents meeting a stranger. They looked like criminals who had finally been caught. "Who is this?" Gary demanded, though his voice shook. "Sydney, what did you do?" I walked into the center of the living room. I felt cold, a deep, marrow-seeping chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "I did not do anything," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "But you did." Elias stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply placed the manila envelope on the coffee table, right on top of a stack of coupon flyers. "I think we all know why I am here." "Mr. Weber," Elias said. Linda let out a small, strangled whimper and backed against the refrigerator. "Sydney, turn around," Gary stammered, his face flushing a blotchy red. "You do not bring strangers into this house." "Tell me the truth." I interrupted him. I looked from Gary to Linda. I looked at the people who had raised me, the people I had tried so hard to please, the people whose approval I had craved for 3 decades. "Am I your daughter?" The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The television was still blaring a commercial for car insurance, a cheerful jingle playing over the destruction of my life. "Of course you are," Linda said, but her eyes darted to the floor. "Do not be ridiculous. I went through labor with you. I nursed you." "Liar," Elias said. The word was soft, but it landed like a whip crack. He reached into the envelope and spread the papers out on the coffee table. "Bank transfers," Elias listed, pointing to each document. $5,000 a month, deposited into an account under the name GL Services. Originating from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, the payments started 30 years ago. They stopped 3 months ago. Gary's face went pale. He stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. "We have the DNA results," Elias continued, "and we have the witness statement from the nurse who falsified the birth records in 1993. It is over." Gary sank back onto the arm of the sofa. He looked defeated, not apologetic. He looked like a man whose luck had finally run out. The money stopped. Gary muttered, staring at the floor. "We did not hear from her for months. We thought the deal was done." "Her?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Who is her?" Linda burst into tears. She covered her face with her hands, sliding down the front of the refrigerator until she was sitting on the linoleum floor. "Miranda," Linda sobbed. "It was Miranda." I froze. Miranda. That was the name of Elias's wife. The woman I had seen in magazines standing next to him, the stepmother of the man who had just divorced me. She came to us, Linda cried, her words spilling out in a rush of hysterical confession. We were in debt. Gary had lost his job at the plant. She showed up with a baby in the back seat of a black car. She said the baby was a mistake. She said the father did not want it. She said if we took you, if we raised you and never asked questions, she would pay us. You bought me? I whispered. The horror of it was so vast I could not comprehend it. You took money to keep me? We took care of you, Gary shouted defensively, though he would not look me in the eye. We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you a roof over your head. Do you know how much a kid costs? That $5,000 barely covered the trouble. The trouble. Suddenly, my entire childhood rearranged itself in my mind. I remembered the way Gary would look at me when I asked for money for a field trip, not with the stress of a poor father, but with the annoyance of an employee dealing with an expense report. I remembered the way Linda never hugged me unless someone else was watching. I remembered the times I would get sick, and instead of worry, I would see calculation in their eyes, as if they were wondering if my medical bills would cut into their profit margin. I was not a daughter. I was a job. I was a long-term rental property. Why? I asked, tears streaming down my face. Why did she give me to you? Why not just put me up for adoption? Linda looked up, her face streaked with mascara. Because she wanted to make sure you never came back. She wanted to know where you were. She used to come watch you. The air left the room. What? When you were 7, Linda whispered. You remember that summer you broke your arm at the park? I nodded slowly. I had fallen off the swing set. I remembered lying in the wood chips, crying, waiting for Linda to look up from her magazine. There was a woman in a car, Linda said, a silver Mercedes. She parked by the fence. She watched you cry for 10 minutes before she drove away. That was her. That was Miranda. She paid us a bonus that month because she said seeing you hurt made her feel better. I felt like I was going to be sick. The cruelty was precise. It was intimate. This woman, this Miranda, had not just banished me. She had consumed my suffering like fine wine. She had paid my fake parents to neglect me. I looked at Elias. He was standing perfectly still, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes were burning with a rage so cold it could freeze the sun. He was learning, alongside me, the depth of the betrayal in his own home. You knew, Elias said to Gary, his voice dangerously low. You knew she was my daughter. You saw the news. You saw the search parties. We needed the money, Gary snapped, his fear turning into aggression. We were nobodies. You people. You have everything. What is one kid to you? You probably just made another one. And look at her. She is fine. She is grown. So what if we took the cash? We did the work. Elias moved so fast I barely saw it. He grabbed Gary by the collar of his stained t-shirt and slammed him against the wall. The family photos, fake photos of a fake family, rattled on their hooks. You stole her life, Elias snarled. You stole 30 years. You are going to rot in a cell for the rest of your miserable existence. He let go of Gary, who slumped to the floor, gasping for air. Elias turned to me. Sydney, let us go. I stood there, looking at the people I had called Mom and Dad for 32 years. I looked at the kitchen table where I had done my homework alone. I looked at the corner where I used to hide when they fought. I realized with a jolting clarity that I had never actually been home. I had been in a holding cell. I did not say goodbye. There were no words left for them. They were not my parents. They were my jailers. I walked out of the house, past the plastic snowman, past the crabgrass, and back to the black town car. The wind bit at my cheeks, drying my tears. I got into the car and sat next to Elias. He looked at me, his expression softening. I am sorry, he said. I am so sorry I did not find you sooner. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had searched for me for 3 decades while my husband, his son, was flying to Paris with a mistress. I thought about Miranda. the woman who had paid for my pain. "I want the test," I said. My voice was hard. I did not recognize it. Elias nodded. "We have a doctor waiting at the estate." "I want the official test," I repeated. "I want it on paper. I want it legal. And then, I want to meet her." Elias looked at me, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a grim, shark-like smile. "You will," he said. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving Maple Ridge behind in the darkness, I touched the window. I was leaving Sydney Weber behind. I was leaving the victim behind. If Miranda Hawthorne wanted a fight, if she wanted to see me hurt, she was going to get her wish. But this time, I was going to be the one doing the hurting. The girl who cried in the wood chips was gone. The woman sitting in the leather seat was ready to burn their whole world down. The official DNA test results arrived on a tablet screen held by a doctor in a white coat who looked more like a trembling waiter than a medical professional. We were standing in the grand foyer of the Hawthorne estate, a space so vast it could have swallowed my entire apartment complex whole. The floors were black marble, polished to a mirror shine that reflected my worn sneakers and the exhausted, terrified face of my daughter, Mia. "Positive," the doctor said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The probability is 99.99%. I did not feel relief. I felt a heavy, leaden finality. Sydney Weber was officially dead. I was Hazel Hawthorne. I was the heiress to a kingdom I did not know, a kingdom built on secrets and ice. Elias placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a heavy, possessive weight. "Welcome home," he said. Home. I looked around. To my left was a staircase that spiraled up into darkness. To my right, a hallway lined with portraits of people who looked severe and unhappy. This was not a home. It was a mausoleum. We moved into the drawing room. A fire was roaring in a fireplace large enough to roast a pig, but the room was freezing. Standing by the mantel, holding a crystal glass of amber liquid, was a woman. She was tall, impossibly thin, and wore a dress that looked like it was woven from spun silver. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it pulled the skin of her face taut. Miranda Hawthorne. She turned as we entered. Her eyes swept over me, taking in my cheap parka, my messy hair, and my daughter clinging to my leg. She did not look surprised. She looked bored. "So," she said, her voice like cracking ice, "the stray cat returns." "Miranda," Elias warned, his voice low, "be careful." She took a sip of her drink, her eyes locking onto mine. I recognized that stare. It was the same look Linda Weber had described, the look of the woman in the silver Mercedes who had watched a 7-year-old girl cry in the wood chips. She was not looking at a person. She was looking at a mistake she had failed to erase. "You have grown," she said, tilting her head. "You have your mother's chin. It is a pity." She was weak, too. I felt a surge of rage so hot it nearly warmed the room. I stepped forward, pulling Mia behind me. "I know what you did," I said. "I know you paid the Webers. I know you watched me." Miranda laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "You have no proof, darling. Just the ramblings of two poverty-stricken grifters who would say anything to save their own skins. You think you can walk in here, wearing those rags, and threaten me?" "I am not threatening you," I said. "I am promising you." The doors to the drawing room opened, and the room began to fill. It was a surreal parade. Men in suits, women in pearls, lawyers clutching briefcases. These were the aunts, uncles, and board members of Hawthorne Dynamics. They whispered behind their hands, casting sidelong glances at me. I could hear snippets of their conversation. "Is that her? She looks like a maid. Is it true about the kidnapping? Elias is losing his mind." I stood straight, refusing to shrink. I was a checkout girl from Aurora, but I was also the daughter of the man who owned them all. I channeled every ounce of grit I had learned from surviving 30 years of mediocrity and stared back at them until they looked away. Elias moved to the center of the room. He motioned to a man in a gray suit, Arthur Sterling, the family's chief legal counsel. Sterling looked pale. He was sweating. Despite the chill in the room, He held a red folder in his hands as if it were radioactive. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Elias boomed. His presence commanded absolute silence. "You all know the rumors. Tonight, I am confirming them. My daughter, Hazel, has returned." A ripple of polite, nervous applause went through the room. Miranda rolled her eyes and took another sip of her drink. "But," Elias continued, his voice darkening, "that is not the only truth that needs to be brought into the light tonight." He nodded to Sterling. The lawyer stepped forward, his hands shaking as he opened the red folder. "There has been a discovery," Sterling said, his voice trembling. "In the process of vetting the family trust for Ms. Hawthorne's return, we conducted a full audit of all biological assets and lineages connected to the estate." He paused, looking at Miranda. She went still. The glass in her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. "We have found a discrepancy regarding Mr. Lucas Carter," Sterling said. My heart stopped. Why were they talking about Lucas? He was in Paris. He was the villain of my old life. What did he have to do with this new one? "Lucas Carter," Sterling continued, reading from the paper, "was hired 7 years ago as a junior analyst. However, cross-referenced genetic markers from his employment medical file matched the paternal markers of the Hawthorne line." I frowned, confusion clouding my brain. "What does that mean?" I asked. Elias turned to me. His face was gray. He looked aged, defeated. "It means," Elias said, his voice breaking, "that Lucas is not just an employee, and he is not just Miranda's stepson through a former marriage, as she claimed." Miranda slammed her glass down on the mantel. The crystal shattered. "Enough!" she shrieked. Sterling ignored her. He looked at me with pity in his eyes. "It means, Ms. Hawthorne, that Lucas Carter is Elias Hawthorne's biological son. He was born from an affair 28 years ago that was concealed." The world stopped spinning. The sound was sucked out of the room. I stared at Elias. Then I stared at the lawyer. If Lucas is Elias's son, and I am Elias's daughter. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I almost fell. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the back of a velvet armchair to stay upright. "No," I whispered. "No, that is not possible." "We were married," I said, my voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "We were married for 7 years. We have a child." I looked down at Mia, my beautiful, innocent daughter, the product of a marriage between a brother and a sister. I clamped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. Every memory of Lucas, every kiss, every touch, every moment of intimacy suddenly turned into something rotting and vile. I felt dirty. I felt contaminated. The betrayal in Paris was nothing compared to this. This was a violation of the laws of nature. "You knew!" Elias roared, turning on Miranda. Miranda stood her ground, though her face was pale. She smoothed her silver dress, regaining her composure with terrifying speed. "I suspected," she spat, "when Lucas showed up looking for a job. He had your eyes, Elias. It was not hard to guess." "And you let them marry?" Elias screamed. The veins in his neck bulged. "You let my son marry my daughter? You watched them live together? You watched them have a child?" Miranda smiled. It was a smile of pure malice. "It was poetic justice," she said. "The two mistakes of your life, finding each other, I thought it was fitting. Besides, it kept them distracted. It kept them away from the money. Who would look for a missing heiress when she is playing house with the bastard son in a rental apartment in Aurora?" The cruelty was so immense it was breathless. She had known. For 7 years. She had watched us. She had probably laughed at our wedding photos. She had turned our lives into a twisted joke for her own amusement. Elias lunged at her, but 2 security guards stepped in, holding him back. "Get out," Elias snarled. "Get out of my house." "This is my house, too," Miranda screamed back. "I have rights. I have shares." "Not anymore," Elias said. He looked at Sterling. "Show her the rest." Sterling pulled out another document. "Mr. Hawthorne has invoked the morality clause in the prenuptial agreement," Sterling said. given your active participation in the concealment of a kidnapping and the facilitation of incestuous relations. Your assets are frozen. Your access to the estate is revoked effective immediately." Miranda's face crumbled. The mask of arrogance fell away, revealing pure animal panic. "You cannot do this to me!" she screamed as the guards took her arms. "I am a Hawthorne." "You are nothing," Elias said coldly, as they dragged her screaming from the room. The silence rushed back in, but it was not peaceful. It was heavy with the stench of the truth. I sank into the armchair, pulling Mia onto my lap. I buried my face in her hair, sobbing dry, heaving sobs. I felt like I was dissolving. My husband was my brother. My marriage was a crime. My daughter was a medical anomaly. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab Mia and flee back to the cold apartment, to the poverty, to the ignorance. I wanted to scrub my skin until it bled. Elias knelt beside me. He did not try to touch me. He looked at the floor, tears streaming down his face. "I did not know," he whispered. "I swear to you, Sydney, I did not know about Lucas until the audit this morning. I thought he was just a bright young man. I failed you. I failed both of you." I looked up at him. I looked at the father who had missed me, and the father who had unknowingly allowed this horror to happen. I saw his pain, but I also saw his power. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve. The shock was still there, vibrating in my bones, but something else was rising through the nausea. It was a cold, hard resolve. They thought I was trash. They thought I was a joke. Miranda thought she could use my life as a punchline. Lucas thought he could abandon me and run to Paris with his boss, never knowing that he was running from his own blood. I looked at Mia. She was looking at me with wide, scared eyes. "Mommy?" she asked. "I am here, baby," I said. My voice was steady. "I am right here." I stood up, holding Mia in my arms. I looked at the room full of gaping, whispering relatives. I looked at Elias. "Call the press," I said. Elias looked up, surprised. "Now?" "Right now," I said. "I am not hiding. I am not running. I want every camera in the country on this lawn in 1 hour." "But the scandal," Sterling stammered. "The stock price." "I do not care about your stock price," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I want the world to know who I am. I want them to know I am Hazel Hawthorne. And I want them to know that I'm reopening the investigation into my kidnapping." I walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling, dark estate. Somewhere out there, Miranda was planning her defense. In Paris, Lucas was sleeping in silk sheets, oblivious to the fact that his life was over. "Let them look," I said, turning back to face my father. "I am not the victim anymore. I am the evidence, and I am going to bury them with it." The morning headlines did not call me a victim. They did not call me a survivor. They called me the checkout girl heiress. It was a nickname that dripped with condescension, reducing 30 years of struggle into a catchy, Cinderella-style soundbite that the public could digest over their morning coffee. I sat in the breakfast nook of the Hawthorne estate, scrolling through the articles on a tablet Elias had given me. The photos were unflattering paparazzi shots of me leaving the house in my old parka, contrasted with glamour shots of Miranda from charity galas. The narrative was shifting, and not in my favor. Miranda had been removed from the house, but she had not been removed from the board of public opinion. Sources close to the family, which I knew meant her assistants, were already leaking stories to the tabloids. They painted a picture of me as a greedy opportunist, a woman who had abandoned her loving adoptive parents the moment a billionaire snapped his fingers. Then I saw the interview. It was on a morning talk show. Gary and Linda Weber were sitting on a beige couch, holding hands. Linda was wearing a cardigan I had never seen before, looking frail and sympathetic. Gary looked solemn. "We just want her to be happy," Linda said to the camera, wiping away a fake tear. "We raised her with so much love. We gave her everything we had. But as soon as she saw the money, she cut us off. She will not even answer our calls. It breaks a mother's heart to be discarded like this." I threw the tablet onto the table. The sound of it hitting the marble echoed in the large room. The audacity was breathtaking. They had sold me for $5,000 a month, neglected me for decades, and now they were monetizing their betrayal on national television. The public was eating it up. The comments section was filled with venom, calling me ungrateful, cold, and a gold digger. "I am going to sue them," I said to the empty room. "You cannot sue them for lying to the press." "Sydney," Elias said, walking into the room. He looked tired. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes were weary. "Not yet. If you fight them now, you look defensive. You have to prove your worth first." "Prove my worth?" I asked, standing up. "I am your daughter." "To me, you are my daughter," Elias said gently but firmly. "To the board of directors, you are a liability. To the shareholders, you are a scandal. The stock dropped 4% this morning. The board wants to know if you are competent, or if you are just a cashier who got lucky with a DNA test." "So what do?" I asked. "You go to work," Elias said. I expected an office. I expected a desk with a view. Maybe a mentor to guide me through the complexities of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. I was naive. Because of the nepotism laws and the intense scrutiny from the board, many of whom were still loyal to Miranda, Elias could not just hand me an executive title. I had to start where everyone else started. Actually, I had to start lower, to prove I was not being given a free ride. I was assigned to the Records and Archival Department in the basement of Hawthorne Dynamics. My uniform was a gray polo shirt and stiff black trousers. My job was to digitize decades of physical invoices and shipping manifests. It was mind-numbing, repetitive work. I spent 8 hours a day in a windowless room that smelled of dust and ozone, feeding paper into a high-speed scanner. My manager was a man named Mr. Henderson, a petty tyrant who clearly enjoyed ordering a billionaire's daughter around. "No phones on the floor. Weber," he barked at me on my first day, using my old name, "and tuck in your shirt. We have standards here." I swallowed my pride. I tucked in my shirt. I scanned the papers. Every time I wanted to scream, I thought of Miranda sipping cocktails while I worked. I thought of Gary and Linda lying on television, and I kept working. I was used to hard work. I was used to standing on my feet for hours. The other employees in the basement, mostly interns and lifers who had been passed over for promotions, ignored me. To them, I was a tourist in their misery. But the basement gave me something the boardroom could not. It gave me data. I was scanning financial records from the last 10 years. Most people would have just shoved the papers through the machine, but I read them. I had spent 7 years managing a household budget on pennies. I knew how to spot a discrepancy. I knew that when numbers did not add up, someone was usually stealing. While I worked, my phone, locked in my locker, was filling up with venom from the life I had left behind. I checked it during my 15-minute lunch break. There were 5 emails from Lucas. The first 3 were incoherent rants. He was drunk, spiraling in a hotel room in Paris. "How could you?" he wrote. "You knew. You must have known. You tricked me into this sick joke." He was rewriting history to make himself the victim. He ignored the fact that he had cheated on me, abandoned me, and stolen our savings before he knew we were related. The 4th email was purely vicious. "You will never be one of them. You are just a grocery clerk playing dress-up. Miranda is right about you. You are trash." The 5th email was a shift in tone. It was fear. "I need money. The company card has been cut off. Celeste is threatening to leave if I cannot pay the hotel bill. Sydney, please, we are family." I almost laughed. Now we were family. Then came the message from Celeste. It was a voice memo sent through a burner account. I sat on a crate in the loading dock, eating a sandwich I had made myself, and pressed play. "Hello? Cinderella?" Celeste's voice purred. She sounded amused, not worried. "I hear you are scanning papers in the dungeon. How fitting. Look, honey, do not think you have won anything. Lucas chose Paris. He chose me. You just chose his daddy's wallet. Enjoy the money while it lasts. Miranda is going to chew you up and spit you out before the fiscal quarter is over." I did not delete the message. I saved it to a secure cloud folder I had named Ammunition. I saved Lucas's emails too. Let them talk. Let them dig their own graves. I was not just scanning papers anymore. I was building a case. 2 weeks into the job, I found it. It was a shipping manifest from 3 years ago. A subsidiary of Hawthorne Dynamics, a logistics company called Apex Supply, had been charging the parent company for premium shipping containers on a route from Shanghai to Los Angeles. But when I cross-referenced the invoice with the Port Authority logs, which I had access to because I was supposed to be archiving them, I noticed a discrepancy. The weight of the containers listed on the Apex invoice did not match the weight recorded by the port. The port logs showed standard, non-refrigerated containers. Apex was billing for temperature-controlled, high-security units. The difference in cost was $4,000 per container. I started digging. I went back 5 years. Apex Supply had been overbilling Hawthorne Dynamics on every single shipment. I did the math on a scrap of paper. $4,000 times 3,000 shipments a year, over 5 years. $60 million. Someone was skimming $60 million out of the company supply chain, and because the amounts were buried in massive shipping budgets, no one had noticed. Or someone had noticed and was being paid to look the other way? I looked at the signature on the authorization forms for Apex Supply. It was a digital stamp, authorized by the Office of the CFO. The chief financial officer 3 years ago had been a man named Richard Sterling, Arthur Sterling's brother, and a close ally of Miranda Hawthorne. My heart began to race. This was not just an error. This was embezzlement. I organized my findings. I printed the manifests, the port logs, and the invoices. I highlighted the discrepancies in yellow marker. I did not take it to Mr. Henderson. I knew he would bury it or take credit for it. I waited until 6 o'clock. When the executive elevators unlocked for the cleaning crews, I took the service elevator up to the 40th floor. I walked past the empty cubicles and the glass-walled offices until I found the office of Marcus Vance, the current VP of Operations. Elias had told me Vance was one of the few honest men left in the building, a man who hated corporate politics. His door was open. He was packing his briefcase. He looked up, surprised to see a woman in a gray basement uniform standing in his doorway. "Can I help you?" he asked, frowning. I walked in and placed the stack of papers on his desk. "My name is Sydney Hawthorne," I said. "I work in archives. I think you have a $60 million leak in your Pacific supply chain." Vance looked at me. He looked at the name tag on my gray polo. He could have laughed. He could have called security. But he saw the look in my eye. It was the same look I used to give customers who tried to use expired coupons. I knew I was right. He put down his briefcase and picked up the papers. He scanned the first page, then the second. He sat down slowly. He pulled a calculator out of his drawer. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the tapping of keys and the rustle of paper. "Where did you find this?" he asked without looking up. "In the basement," I said. "Box 402. It was mislabeled as cafeteria receipts." Vance looked up at me. His expression had changed. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a sharp, assessing respect. "This signature," he said, pointing to the authorization. "Do you know whose this is?" "Yes," I said. "It belongs to the former CFO, who is currently sitting on the board of directors, and who is Miranda Hawthorne's bridge partner." Vance leaned back in his chair. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "If this is true," he said, "this is war. If we expose this, we are accusing a board member of fraud. Miranda will come for you. She will say you forged these." "Let her try," I said. "The port logs are public record. I just connected the dots." Vance smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. "You are not what I expected. Ms. Hawthorne." "Call me Sydney," I said. The next morning, Vance presented the findings to Elias and the Internal Audit Committee. The shockwave was immediate. An emergency investigation was launched. The stock price stabilized as rumors of a massive corruption cleanup hit the market. By noon, I was summoned out of the basement. I was given a temporary desk on the 40th floor, ostensibly to assist with the audit. But the victory came with a price. At 2 o'clock, I received a text message. It was from an unknown number. You think you are clever. You are just digging your own grave. Stay out of things you do not understand, or the next thing to disappear will not be money. It will be your daughter. I stared at the screen. The threat was cold, precise, and terrifying. Miranda knew. She knew I was the one who had found the leak. She knew I was coming for her money. And now she was coming for the only thing that mattered to me. I gripped the phone tight. I did not cry. I did not call Elias. I forwarded the text to the private security detail Elias had hired for me. You want to fight, Miranda? I whispered to the screen. I opened the folder on my computer where I had saved Celeste's voice memo and Lucas's emails. I looked at the spreadsheet of the $60 million. I am not just a cashier anymore. I thought, I am the auditor, and I am going to close your account, permanently. The victory with the shipping manifest felt like a drug. For 48 hours, I walked through the corridors of Hawthorne Dynamics with my head high, feeling the weight of the legitimacy I had clawed back from the people who hated me. But I had forgotten a fundamental rule of survival in the wild. When you wound a predator, you do not make it safer, you make it desperate. The retaliation did not come in the form of a lawsuit or a boardroom ambush. It came quietly, on a Thursday evening, to my personal email address. I was in the nursery I had set up for Mia in the east wing of the estate. It was the only room in the mansion that felt warm, filled with her stuffed animals and the smell of lavender baby shampoo. I was checking my phone while she brushed her teeth in the adjoining bathroom. One new message, sender, unknown, subject, a choice. I opened it, expecting spam, or perhaps another drunken rant from Lucas. The body of the email was short. Leave Hawthorne if you want to keep the little one safe. You are playing a game you cannot win. My stomach tightened. It was a standard threat, the kind I had been warned about. But then I scrolled down. There was an attachment. It was a photograph. The blood drained from my face so fast I felt dizzy. The photo was high resolution, taken with a telephoto lens. It showed Mia playing in the private garden at the back of the estate. She was bending down to look at a ladybug on a rosebush. I looked at the timestamp in the metadata. It was taken yesterday afternoon. The garden was behind 12-foot walls. It was patrolled by security guards. And yet, someone had a clear line of sight. They had been watching her. They had been close enough to see the focused expression on her face, the way her hair fell over her eyes. My phone rang in my hand, vibrating against my palm like a living thing. I looked at the screen. No caller ID. I answered it. I did not speak. I just held the phone to my ear. My breath caught in my throat. She is wearing the blue pajamas tonight, a male voice said. It was smooth, mechanically distorted, stripping away any accent or age, the ones with the clouds on them. I dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. Mia walked out of the bathroom, wearing her blue pajamas with the white clouds. "Mommy?" she asked, looking at me with wide eyes. "Why did you drop your phone?" I scooped her up, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. I ran to the window and slammed the heavy velvet drapes shut. I locked the door. I sat in the corner of the room, away from any sightlines, clutching my daughter while I dialed the emergency number for the head of security. "They are here," I whispered into the phone. "They are watching us right now." The next 12 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Elias turned the estate into a fortress. He hired 6 more guards, all former special forces. He had the perimeter swept for bugs and cameras. He had the IT department scrub my devices. But they found nothing. The email address was routed through a server in Russia. The call was untraceable. The angle of the photo suggested it was taken from a drone or a long-range lens from the wooded hills a mile away. But there were no footprints, no tire tracks. It was a ghost operation. Elias was pacing in the library, a glass of scotch in his hand that he was not drinking. He looked older than he had the day before. The invincible billionaire looked rattled. "It is Miranda," I said. I was sitting in a leather chair, my arms crossed, fighting the urge to shake. "We cannot prove it," Elias said, his voice tight. She is smart. Sydney. She does not leave fingerprints. She does not need to. I said, who else has the money to hire this kind of surveillance? Who else benefits if I leave? Elias slammed his glass down. I will kill her, he growled. If she touches a hair on Mia's head, I will kill her with my bare hands. But Miranda was not working alone, and she was not just attacking from the shadows. She was orchestrating a war on multiple fronts. The next morning, the tabloids ran a new story. The Mad Heiress. Is Sydney Hawthorne mentally stable? The article was filled with quotes from anonymous sources claiming I had a history of paranoia and hallucinations. It dug up a visit I had made to a therapist 5 years ago after a miscarriage, twisting my grief into evidence of insanity. And then there was Celeste. My former idol, the woman I had once thought was the epitome of grace, was now the architect of my public destruction. She released a statement through her lawyer, claiming that I had been harassing her and Lucas, that I was obsessed with destroying their happiness because I could not accept the end of my marriage. She is a woman scorned. Celeste's statement read, "It is tragic that she is using the Hawthorne family resources to pursue a personal vendetta against the man she drove away." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They were painting me as the villain in my own tragedy. But the worst blow came from Paris. My security team intercepted a series of encrypted data packets, moving between a server in the Cayman Islands and a private terminal in a hotel suite in Paris. Lucas was moving files. He was not just hiding, he was acting as a digital mule for Miranda. He was accessing old archives, things he had clearance for from his time as an analyst, and he was scrubbing them. He was deleting transaction histories. He was wiping metadata. He is erasing her trail. I realized as I looked at the code on the screen in the security center, she is using him to clean up the crime scene before we can find the body. I felt a surge of nausea. Lucas was my brother. He was the father of my child, and he was actively helping the woman who had ruined my life to threaten his own daughter. He was so weak, so desperate for approval and money, that he would sell out his own flesh and blood. I wanted to fly to Paris and scream at him. I wanted to shake him until he woke up, but I could not leave. I was trapped in the gilded cage of the estate, afraid to let Mia out of my sight. 2 days later, the threat moved from the digital world into the physical one. I had hired a new nanny for Mia, a woman named Elena, who came highly recommended by the agency Elias used. She was kind, soft-spoken, and Mia liked her. On Tuesday morning, Elena did not show up. I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called the agency. They said she had not checked in. At 10 in the morning, the head of security, a man named Kane, walked into the library. His face was grim. "You need to see this, Ms. Hawthorne." He opened his laptop and played a video file. It was footage from a traffic camera 2 blocks from the estate, time-stamped at 7 in the morning. Elena's small sedan was stopped at a red light. A black SUV pulled up alongside it. 2 men in suits got out. They did not drag her. They did not use weapons. They simply opened her door and showed her something on a phone. Elena's face went white. She got out of her car, leaving the engine running, and got into the back of the SUV. The car drove away. "They got to her," Kane said. "They probably threatened her family. She is gone. Sydney, we will not see her again. She is not dead, I suspect, but she has been paid or terrified into disappearing." I stared at the screen. The message was clear. "We can get to anyone. No one is safe around you." Mia came running into the room, holding a doll. "Mommy, where is Elena? She promised we would make cookies." I felt a crack in my heart. I knelt down and smoothed her hair, forcing a smile that felt like it was made of glass. Elena had to go visit her sick mom. "Baby, I lied. Just you and me today." I took Mia upstairs and set her up with a movie. Then I walked into Elias's office. I closed the door and locked it. "I am done," I said. Elias looked up from his desk. "Done?" "I am done hiding," I said. "I am done waiting for the next email or the next disappearance. I am done letting them terrorize my daughter." "What do you want to do?" Elias asked. I walked over to his desk. "You said you had a file," I said. When we were at the Weber house, you said you had financial records that could bury Miranda, but you were missing a piece." Elias nodded slowly. He opened a safe behind his desk and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. "This contains the records of the shell companies Miranda set up in the 90s, he said. "It shows the money flowing out, but it does not show where it landed. It shows withdrawals, but no deposits. Without the destination accounts, I cannot prove she was the beneficiary. She can claim she was paying consultants or vendors. I need the receiving end." I looked at the ledger. I thought about the encrypted packets Lucas was moving in Paris. I thought about the $60 million shipping leak I had found in the basement. "The receiving accounts are not in a ledger," I said. "They are in Paris." Elias frowned. "What?" "Lucas," I said. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. "He is not just scrubbing old files. He is consolidating them. Miranda is panicking. She is trying to move her liquid assets into accounts that the U.S. courts cannot touch. She is using Lucas to facilitate the transfers because he has the finance codes." I looked at my father. "He has the missing piece," I said. "He has the account numbers on his laptop. If we get that laptop, we have everything. We have the kidnapping payoffs, the embezzlement, the fraud. We have the chains to put Miranda in prison for the rest of her life." Elias looked at me. His eyes were dark. "Paris is outside our jurisdiction. Sydney, and Lucas. He is guarded by Celeste's private security." "I do not care about jurisdiction," I said, "and I do not care about Celeste." I walked to the window and looked out at the garden where the drone had photographed my daughter. The fear was still there, sitting cold in my stomach, but it had changed. It was no longer the paralyzing fear of prey. It was the focused, adrenaline-fueled fear of a hunter. "They made a mistake," I said quietly. "What mistake?" Elias asked. "They thought that because I was poor, I was weak," I said. "They thought that because I was a mother, I would run away to protect my child. But they forgot where I came from. I scanned groceries for 12 years. Dad, I dealt with thieves and liars every day for minimum wage. I know how to spot a bluff." I turned back to him. "I am not running," I said. "I am going to Paris." Elias stood up. "Absolutely not. It is too dangerous." "I am going," I repeated, "and I am not going as Sydney Weber. I am going as Hazel Hawthorne. You are going to set up a meeting. You are going to tell Miranda that I am ready to surrender. Tell her I want to negotiate a settlement. Tell her I will sign away my rights to the company in exchange for safety." Elias's eyes widened. "You are going to trap them." "I am going to walk into the lion's den," I said, "and I'm going to walk out with their teeth." I picked up the phone from his desk. "Get the jet ready," I said, "and get me Arthur Sterling. I need to draft a surrender agreement that looks so real they will be popping champagne before they even read the fine print." I looked at the photo of Mia on the desk. "You threatened my daughter." "Miranda, I thought, now I am coming for your son, and I am going to take everything he has, just like he took everything from me." The library of the Hawthorne estate had been transformed into a command center. The heavy velvet drapes were drawn tight against the world, shutting out the paparazzi helicopters that still buzzed overhead like angry hornets. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, ozone from the overheating servers, and the cold, metallic scent of retribution. We were not just looking for a leak anymore. We were performing an autopsy on a 30-year-old crime. Elias sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking like a general who had aged 10 years in 10 days. To his right was Kane, the head of security. To his left was Arthur Sterling, who was sweating through his third dress shirt of the day. And then there was me. I was no longer wearing the gray polo of the archives department. I was wearing a black blazer, my hair pulled back, my eyes scanning the digital timeline projected onto the wall. We had hired a forensic accounting team, a group of ex-FBI agents who specialized in following money that did not want to be found. They had been digging for 72 hours straight. "We found the nurse," one of the agents said. He was a young man with dark circles under his eyes. He tapped a key, and a photo appeared on the screen. It was a grainy employee ID from 1993. Beatrice Miller. She was the night shift nurse on the maternity ward the night Hazel Hawthorne disappeared. She died 4 years ago, the agent continued, but her estate was surprisingly large for a registered nurse. 2 weeks after the kidnapping, she paid cash for a house in Florida, $150,000. Where did the money come from? I asked, leaning forward. It came from a shell company called Janus Key, the agent said. We traced the incorporation papers. Janus Key was dissolved in '95, but the signatory on the bank account. He paused for effect, bringing up another document. The signatory was not Miranda, Elias guessed. She is too careful. No, the agent said. It was a woman named Evelyn Moreau. The room went silent. The name hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Moreau, I whispered, as in Celeste Moreau. The agent nodded. Evelyn Moreau was Celeste's mother. I looked at Elias. His face had drained of color. Evelyn was Miranda's personal assistant for 20 years, Elias said, his voice hollow. She ran Miranda's calendar. She planned her parties. She used to babysit Lucas. The pieces clicked together in my mind with a sickening snap. It was not just a crime of opportunity, it was an inheritance. Miranda had groomed Evelyn, and Evelyn had groomed Celeste. The relationship between Lucas and Celeste was not a random office romance. It was a handler managing an asset. Celeste had been assigned to Lucas to keep him close, to control him, and to ensure that if the truth about his parentage ever came out, she would be there to steer the ship. They have been playing us for generations, I said, feeling a cold fury rising in my chest. Celeste did not just steal my husband. She was finishing her mother's work. We needed more than a dead nurse and a paper trail. Though, we needed a smoking gun that linked Miranda to the crime today. We brought Linda Weber in. She came through the service entrance, escorted by 2 guards. She looked smaller than I remembered, her cheap coat looking out of place among the antiques. She would not meet my eyes. She was terrified of prison. And her lawyer had told her that full cooperation was her only lifeline. I have something, Linda said, her voice trembling. She reached into her purse and pulled out a plastic Ziploc bag. Inside was a piece of yellowed stationery. She gave this to me the day she dropped Sydney off. Linda whispered. She wrote down the schedule for the formula and the sleeping pills. She wanted to make sure Sydney stayed sedated for the first week, so she would not cry and alert the neighbors. Kane took the bag with gloved hands. He placed the letter under a scanner. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and unmistakable. It is Miranda's handwriting, Elias said. I would recognize those loops anywhere. But it was just a schedule. It was not a confession. Keep digging, I ordered the team. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by printouts of Miranda's old emails. I had learned a few things in the basement archives, specifically about how the executive servers backed up deleted items. Miranda thought she had wiped her correspondence, but she did not know about the shadow server in the Utah data center. I found an email thread from 6 months ago. It was between Miranda and an encrypted address that we now knew belonged to Celeste. Subject, the loose end. The girl is asking questions. Miranda had written, she is getting too close to the truth about the trust fund. If she disappears again, make sure she stays gone this time. No mistakes like 93? I stared at the screen. If she disappears again. It was an admission of the past crime and a command for a new one. I called Sterling over. We got her, I said, pointing to the screen. This is conspiracy to commit murder. Sterling adjusted his glasses, reading the text. He frowned. It is strong, he admitted, but a good defense attorney, and she can afford the best, will argue this is hypothetical. They will argue, disappears means fired or relocated. They will say, stays gone refers to her employment. It is circumstantial. Sydney, to get a conviction that sticks, to destroy her completely. We need to catch her pulling the trigger. We need an overt act. I slammed my hand on the table. She kidnapped my daughter's nanny. She sent men to stalk us. And we have no proof linking her to those men. Sterling said gently, if we arrest her now, she makes bail in an hour. She spins the narrative. She destroys the evidence in Paris. We have one shot at this. We cannot miss. I looked at the email again. Make sure she stays gone. She wants me gone, I said quietly. She is terrified that I'm going to expose the financial fraud and the incest. She is desperate. I looked up at Elias and Kane. She wants a solution. I said, let us give her one. What are you proposing? Elias asked. I am the bait, I said. The room erupted in protest. Elias stood up, shouting that he would not allow it. Kane shook his head, listing the security risks. Listen to me, I shouted over them. They quieted down. Miranda thinks I am a scared, uneducated cashier. I said, she thinks I'm breaking under the pressure. The tabloids are already saying I am mentally unstable. Let us lean into that. I outlined the plan. It was simple, dangerous, and relied entirely on Miranda's arrogance. We would leak a story to a known mole in the household staff. The story would be that Sydney Hawthorne had cracked, that I was taking Mia and fleeing the country to a non-extradition sanctuary to escape the threats. We would create a flight plan, a private charter leaving from a small airfield north of the city, headed for Switzerland. If Miranda believes I am leaving with the original copies of the evidence, the ledger, the letter, the hard drives, she will not let that plane take off. I said, she cannot risk me existing anywhere in the world with that information. She will try to intercept me. And when she does, Kane said, catching on, we will be waiting. It is a trap, Elias said, his face pale. But if something goes wrong, it will not, I said, because I am not actually going to be on the plane, but she will think I am. We spent the next 12 hours building the lie. We staged a breakdown. I was photographed crying in the garden. I was heard screaming at Elias on the balcony, shouting that I could not take it anymore. We packed bags. We called the airfield and filed a flight plan for, say, Hawthorne. The rumor spread through the house like wildfire. By noon, the mole had undoubtedly called Miranda. At 4 p.m, my phone buzzed. It was an alert from the security team monitoring Miranda's burner phones. Outgoing call from Target A to Target B. The text read, Target B was the head of a mercenary group Miranda had used for corporate espionage in the past. We tapped into the audio. The quality was crystal clear. She is running, Miranda's voice said. She sounded breathless, excited. She is heading to the Northfield airstrip. She has the files. What are your orders, ma'am? A deep voice asked. There was a pause, a silence that stretched for 5 seconds. In that silence, I could hear Miranda weighing her soul against her fortune. Do not let that plane leave the ground, Miranda said. I want the files secured, and I want the problem removed, permanently. Make it look like an accident on the runway. Understood, the voice said. And execute the secondary protocol, Miranda added. If the husband in Paris tries to intervene, cut him loose too. The line went dead. I looked at Elias. He was weeping silently. He had just heard the woman he had been married to for 30 years order the execution of his daughter and his son. We have it, Sterling whispered. He looked like he was about to faint. That is a direct solicitation of capital murder. Not yet, Kane said, checking his weapon. She gave the order. Now they have to show up. We need to catch the hit squad at the airfield to corroborate the intent. I stood up. I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. Let us go to the airfield, I said. I put on a bulletproof vest under my coat. I kissed Mia goodbye, leaving her in the panic room with 3 armed guards and the new, vetted nanny. Mommy has to go finish work, I told her. When I come back, the bad people will be gone forever. We drove to the airfield in a convoy of black SUVs. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The private jet was waiting on the tarmac, its engines whining. We positioned ourselves in the hangar, hidden in the shadows. The local SWAT team, which Sterling had coordinated with the FBI, was surrounding the perimeter in camouflage. We waited. 20 minutes later, 3 vans crashed through the chain-link fence at the far end of the runway. They screeched to a halt near the jet. 6 men jumped out, wearing tactical gear and masks. carrying automatic weapons and canisters of gasoline. They were not there to stop the plane. They were there to burn it. As they approached the stairs of the jet, expecting to find a terrified woman and child, the floodlights of the hangar snapped on, blinding them. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," a voice boomed over the loudspeaker. The men froze. For a second, I thought they would surrender. Then, the leader raised his rifle. Gunfire erupted. It was deafening, a chaotic symphony of pops and cracks. I watched from the safety of the control booth as the SWAT team swarmed them. It was over in 30 seconds. The mercenaries were pinned to the ground, handcuffed. Kane walked over to the leader and ripped off his mask. It was the man whose voice I had heard on the phone. We found a phone in his pocket. It had one active text message chain. The last message, sent 3 minutes ago, read, "Target in sight, proceeding with removal." Kane looked up at the control booth and gave a thumbs up. It was done. The trap had snapped shut. I turned to Elias. "Now," I said, "we go to the party." "What party?" Elias asked, dazed. "The gala," I said. "Miranda is at the Metropolitan Charity Gala tonight. She thinks she is celebrating her victory. She thinks I am burning on a runway." I checked my watch. I want to look her in the eye when she finds out she missed. I walked out of the control booth, the smell of cordite in the air. I was not Hazel Hawthorne, the victim. I was not Sydney Weber, the cashier. I was the executioner, and I had an appointment. The Metropolitan Charity Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Hawthorne Plaza Hotel, a venue that smelled of lilies and old money. It was the social event of the season, a gathering of the city's elite, where alliances were forged over champagne and reputations were destroyed with a whisper. Tonight, Miranda Hawthorne was holding court. She was wearing a blood-red gown that cost more than a starter home, dripping in diamonds that caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. She moved through the crowd of 300 guests with the grace of a shark gliding through calm water, accepting condolences for her troubled stepdaughter who had tragically fled the country. I watched her from the shadows of the mezzanine balcony. I was still wearing the black blazer and the bulletproof vest beneath my coat, and I smelled faintly of jet fuel and gunpowder from the airfield. Elias stood beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. He looked like a man walking to his own execution, but his jaw was set with a resolve I had never seen before. Down below, the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as a massive screen descended from the ceiling behind the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Miranda's voice echoed through the speakers. She stood at the podium, looking mournful. "It is with a heavy heart that I address the rumors swirling around our family. We tried to help her. We tried to save Sydney from her own delusions, but as you will see, some tragedies are inevitable." She signaled the technician. The video began to play. It was a masterfully edited piece of propaganda. It showed grainy footage of me arguing with a cashier at a pharmacy, a moment from 3 years ago when my card had been declined for Mia's medicine, overlaid with ominous music. It showed clips of Gary and Linda Weber looking tearful, claiming I had suffered from psychotic breaks since childhood. It showed doctored emails where I appeared to be demanding $50 million in extortion money. The crowd gasped. I heard the murmurs rising like a tide. "She looks deranged. Poor Miranda. Having to deal with that. I heard she abandoned her child." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the old shame trying to claw its way out. They were laughing at me. They were judging me based on a lie constructed by a woman who had ordered my death less than 2 hours ago. But then I touched the cold hard drive in my pocket. I remembered the sound of the mercenaries' boots on the tarmac. I remembered the text message. "Target in sight." "I am ready," I said to Elias. Elias nodded. He lifted his radio to his lips. "Cut the feed," he ordered. The video on the giant screen flickered and died. The room plunged into confused silence. Miranda frowned, tapping her microphone. "Technical difficulties," she said with a strained smile. "If we could just—" Suddenly, the screen roared back to life. But it was not the smear campaign video. It was a live feed from the security camera in the ballroom, zoomed in directly on Miranda's face. The The crowd murmured in confusion. Miranda looked behind her, her eyes widening. Then, the audio started. It was not music. It was a phone call. The quality was crystal clear, amplified to fill every corner of the ballroom. "Do not let that plane leave the ground." Miranda's recorded voice boomed. "I want the files secured, and I want the problem removed, permanently. Make it look like an accident on the runway." The color drained from Miranda's face in an instant. She looked like a statue made of ash. The guests froze, glasses halfway to their mouths. "And execute the secondary protocol," the recording continued. "If the husband in Paris tries to intervene, cut him loose too." A collective gasp went through the room. I stepped out from the shadows of the mezzanine, walking down the grand staircase, the spotlight operator, perhaps sensing the shift in power or directed by Cain, swung the beam onto me. I walked down the stairs, the heavy thud of my boots echoing on the marble steps. I was not wearing a gown. I looked like a soldier returning from the front lines. "Turn it off!" Miranda shrieked, her voice cracking. "Someone turn it off! It is a fake! It is AI!" I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked straight to the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I climbed the steps and took the microphone from the stand. Miranda stumbled back, clutching the podium. "It is not a fake." "Miranda," I said. My voice was calm. It was terrifyingly calm. "That was recorded 90 minutes ago, and the men you sent to the airfield? They are currently in FBI custody." Miranda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked frantically around the room for allies, for security, for anyone. But I was not done. "Show the money," I said. The screen changed again. This time, it displayed a complex web of bank transfers. It showed the $60 million siphoned from the supply chain. It showed the payments to the nurse in 1993. It showed the monthly transfers to Gary and Linda Weber. And then, it showed the Paris accounts. The side door of the ballroom burst open. I expected police, but it was not the police yet. It was Lucas. He looked like a ghost. He was wearing a wrinkled travel suit, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He had flown in for the victory lap, expecting to be crowned the dutiful son. Instead, he had walked in just in time to hear his stepmother order his execution. He stared at the screen. He stared at Miranda. "You were going to kill me?" he whispered. The microphone picked it up. Miranda flinched. "Lucas, listen to me," she stammered. "It is out of context." "You told me we were partners," Lucas screamed. He rushed the stage, his face twisted in betrayal. "I scrubbed the drives for you. I laundered the money. I sold out my own wife and daughter for you, and you were going to have me killed?" He grabbed Miranda's arm. The crowd screamed. Security guards rushed forward, but Elias held up a hand, stopping them. "Let them hear it," Elias said from the floor. Lucas turned to the crowd, tears streaming down his face. He pointed a shaking finger at Miranda. "She did it," he shouted. "She planned the kidnapping 30 years ago. She set up the shell companies. She told me that if I helped her hide the money, she would make me CEO. She is a monster." "Lucas, stop," a voice cried out from the front row. It was Celeste. She was standing up, looking pale and terrified. She tried to signal Lucas to shut up, but I pointed the remote at the screen. Click. A new document appeared. It was the incorporation paper for the shell company that had paid the nurse. Signatory, Evelyn Moreau. "And you, Celeste," I said into the microphone, "you are not just an innocent bystander. Your mother helped steal me from my crib, and you helped steal $60 million from the company's shipping manifests." Celeste froze. The room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. "I did what I was told," Celeste whispered, backing away. "I was just an employee." "You were the architect," I said. Then, the doors at the back of the ballroom opened with a resounding crash. "Federal agents, stay where you are!" 20 armed agents in windbreakers stormed the room. The guests screamed and scattered, dropping champagne glasses that shattered on the floor. 2 agents marched up the steps. They did not hesitate. They grabbed Miranda's arms and twisted them behind her back. "Miranda Hawthorne, You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit capital murder, kidnapping, and grand larceny. The lead agent read. "Get your hands off me!" Miranda screeched. She kicked and thrashed, her perfect hair coming undone, her red dress bunching up. "Do you know who I am? I am a Hawthorne. Elias, tell them!" Elias walked up to the stage. He looked at his wife of 30 years. He looked at the woman who had tormented his child. "You are not a Hawthorne," Elias said quietly. "You never were." He turned his back on her. The agents dragged Miranda down the steps. She was screaming obscenities, cursing me, cursing Elias, cursing the world. As they hauled her past me, our eyes met. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just looked at her with the cold, hard stare of a woman who had survived. "Goodbye, Miranda," I said. Another team of agents moved on Lucas. He did not fight. He fell to his knees, sobbing, holding his hands out to be cuffed. He looked at me as they pulled him up. "Sydney, please," he begged. "I didn't know about the hit. I didn't know." I looked at the man I had loved for 7 years. I looked at the father of my child, who had chosen money over us. "You knew enough, Lucas," I said. Celeste tried to blend into the crowd, but Kane blocked her path. She was handcuffed in her couture gown, looking like a wilted flower. The ballroom was a scene of absolute devastation. The illusion of the perfect Hawthorne family lay in ruins, shattered on the floor alongside the broken glass. The guests stood in stunned silence, witnessing the fall of an empire. I stood alone on the stage. The screen behind me went black. My legs felt heavy, but my spine was steel. Elias climbed the steps and stood beside me. He took the microphone. "The party is over," he said. "Please go home." As the guests filed out, whispering and looking back at us with a mixture of horror and awe, I felt a strange sensation. The anger that had fueled me for weeks was draining away, leaving behind a hollow, exhausted peace. I had done it. I had burned it down. But as I looked at Lucas being shoved into a police car through the glass doors of the lobby, I realized that revenge was not sweet. It was just necessary. It was the surgical removal of a tumor. It hurt. It bled. But it was the only way to survive. I took Elias's hand. "Let us go get Mia," I said. The empire had fallen. Now, I had to build something new from the ashes. The gavel hit the mahogany block with a sound that felt like a guillotine severing the past from the present. It was a sharp, definitive crack that echoed through the packed courtroom, silencing the whispers of the press and the shuffling of the lawyers. It had been 6 months since the night of the gala. 6 months of depositions, evidence gathering, and the slow grinding gears of the justice system. But today, the grinding stopped. Miranda Hawthorne stood in the defendant's box. She was not wearing red silk or diamonds. She was wearing a shapeless gray jumpsuit issued by the Federal Detention Center. Her hair, once dyed and sprayed into an armor of perfection, was growing out gray at the roots. She looked small. She looked old. And for the first time since I had met her, she looked defeated. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, read the verdict. On the count of conspiracy to commit capital murder, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On the count of kidnapping in the first degree, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On the count of grand larceny and fraud, the jury finds the defendant guilty. Miranda did not scream. She did not cry out for Elias. She simply closed her eyes and slumped forward, her forehead touching the table. The weight of 30 years of lies had finally crushed her. She was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. She would die in a concrete box, forgotten by the society she had killed to impress. The trial had been a parade of humiliation for the conspirators. Linda Weber had taken the stand on the 3rd day, in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 years for custodial interference. She had testified against Miranda. I watched Linda on the stand, her hands shaking as she held the microphone. She recounted the monthly payments. She recounted the cold instructions Miranda had given her to neglect me. She cried. looking at me in the gallery, begging for a forgiveness I did not have the capacity to give. I watched her with the detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. She was not my mother. She was just a witness. Celeste Moreau was next. Her arrogance had evaporated the moment the forensic accountants took the stand. She was facing 20 years for embezzlement and corporate fraud. The woman who had sneered at me in the supermarket, who had mocked my clothes and my life, was now weeping into a tissue, terrified of prison. She had lost her career, her reputation, and her freedom. The Paris dream she had sold to Lucas was now a prison cell in upstate New York. But the final legal severing was the most personal. Family court was a quieter affair. The judge reviewed the DNA evidence and the birth records. He looked at me, and then he looked at the empty chair where Lucas should have been. Lucas had waived his right to appear. He was too ashamed, or perhaps his lawyers had told him it was futile. The marriage between Sidney Weber and Lucas Carter is hereby declared void ab initio, the judge ruled. Due to the consanguinity of the parties, the union was never legal in the eyes of the state. Void. It was as if the last 7 years had never happened. The pain, the betrayal, the nights spent worrying about bills. Legally, none of it existed. The judge turned to the matter of custody. Full physical and legal custody of the minor child, Mia, is awarded to the mother. The father is granted no visitation rights. Pending a psychological evaluation and the conclusion of his own criminal proceedings regarding the embezzlement charges. I walked out of the courtroom a free woman. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a victim. I was a mother, and I was the sole protector of my daughter. I saw Lucas one last time before he was transferred to a minimum security facility to serve his 7-year sentence for fraud. He was being led down the hallway in handcuffs, flanked by 2 marshals. He looked thin. The arrogance of the finance bro was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He stopped when he saw me. The marshals paused. "Sidney," he croaked. His voice was rough. I stopped. I did not step closer. I stood 10 feet away, wrapped in a cashmere coat, holding my head high. "I am sorry," he whispered. Tears welled in his eyes. "I did not know who you were. If I had known." "If you had known I was rich." "You mean?" I asked. My voice was cool, stripped of any emotion. "No," he said, shaking his head. "That is not what I mean. We were happy once, weren't we? Before Paris, before all of this. We were a family." I looked at him. I remembered the discount birthday cake. I remembered him mocking my job. I remembered him leaving me at the airport. We were never a family. "Lucas," I said, "you were a parasite, and I was the host." I turned my back on him. "Sidney," he called out, desperation cracking his voice. "Please, I am your brother." I kept walking. The sound of his footsteps fading away was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The next morning, I entered the boardroom of Hawthorne Dynamics. This time, I did not take the service elevator. I walked through the front doors. The security guards nodded to me. The receptionist stood up. I walked past the portraits of the old men who had built this empire, their eyes seemingly following me. The boardroom was full. The 20 members of the board were seated around the long glass table. Elias was at the head. The seat to his right, usually reserved for the CEO, was empty. I walked in. The room went silent. These were the people who had doubted me. These were the people who had read the tabloids and whispered that I was unstable. I pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table from Elias and sat down. "Mr. Sterling stood up. He looked relieved. The purge of Miranda's allies had been swift and brutal. The board was now lean, scared, and ready to listen. "We have reviewed the proposal," Sterling said. "Given Ms. Hawthorne's role in uncovering the Apex supply fraud and saving the company $60 million, and given her majority shareholder status once the trust is fully enacted, the board has reached a unanimous decision." Elias stood up. He looked at me with pride. "Effective immediately, Sidney is appointed to the executive committee as the vice president of operations," Elias announced, "and upon my retirement in 2 years, She will succeed me as chairman of the board." There was no polite golf clap this time. There was genuine applause. They knew I had saved the company. They knew I was the one who had cut out the rot. Later that afternoon, in Elias's private office, Arthur Sterling brought me a final document. "It is regarding Lucas," Sterling said delicately. "We are scrubbing the company records. We are removing Miranda's name from the philanthropic wings. We assumed you would want to remove Lucas from the family trust documents and the genealogical records. We can erase him. Sydney, we can make it look like he never existed." I looked at the document. It was a draft of the new family history that would be published in the company's centennial book. "No," I said. Sterling blinked. "No?" "Do not erase him," I said. I picked up a pen and tapped the paper. "Leave his name there. List him as the illegitimate son. List his crimes. List his sentence." "But the shame," Sterling stammered. "Not my shame," I said. "His." I looked at Sterling with a hard smile. "If you erase him, he becomes a mystery. If you keep him, he becomes a warning. I want him to wake up every day in his cell knowing that his name is still on the wall, right below mine, as the man who had everything and threw it away for a plane ticket to Paris. Let him be the footnote in my story." I signed the order. That evening, the sun was setting over the estate. The sky was a bruised purple, fading into deep indigo. I stood on the balcony of the master suite, the wind catching my hair. Mia was playing on the terrace below, chasing a firefly. Her laughter floated up to me, pure and unburdened. She would never know the hunger I had known. She would never know the cold of a drafty apartment or the shame of a declined credit card. She was safe. The glass door slid open behind me. Elias stepped out. He held 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to me. "It is done," he said softly. "Miranda is in custody. The stock is up 3 points. The world knows the truth." I took a sip of the water. It tasted clean. "You did good, kid," Elias said. "You are tougher than I ever was." "I learned from the best," I said. "I learned from surviving them." Elias leaned against the railing, looking out at the grounds. "I have been meaning to ask you," he said. "The press is asking. The legal team needs to know for the new identification." He looked at me. "Who are you? Really? Are you Sydney Weber, the survivor? Or are you Hazel Hawthorne, the heiress? You can go back to being Hazel. You can wipe the name Weber off the map. It is a slave name. Sydney, it is the name of the people who bought you." I looked down at Mia. I looked at my hands. Hands that had scanned groceries. Hands that had changed diapers. Hands that had dug through archives and hacked emails. Hazel Hawthorne was an innocent baby who was stolen. I said, she was a victim. She never got to grow up. I turned to Elias. "I am not her. I am the woman who survived the cold. I am the woman who raised that little girl down there. I am the woman who took down Miranda." I smiled, and it was the first smile that reached my eyes in months. "I will be Sydney Hawthorne," I said, "because I choose my own life." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Sydney's revenge as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below and let me know your country or city, and share your thoughts on whether you think Sydney made the right choice in the end. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and please hit that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next story.